Welcome, friends. John Keats said, beauty is truth, truth beauty, that's all. If we are permitted to substitute and put these words, that knowledge is myth, myth is knowledge, that's all. Generally speaking, knowledge is something that we consider to be very concrete, but myth, on the other hand, is a fuzzy mental construct. But it stands out to be as a question, a riddle unsolved, a conundrum which we like to approach here, we cannot solve it. For the same, we have once again invited Professor M.H. Zafar, Professor of Philosophy, the University of Kashmir. Sir, welcome once again.
Thank you.
Sir, does an overconsciousness of mythology make us believers or make us skeptics? Hard-boiled skeptics or credulous believers, if we talk about in that typical, particular religious perspective?
No, exactly. You see, different religions treat myths in a different fashion. Yeah. So, but believing in myths does not make us unbelievers, okay. I suppose. As we said that myth, if we can use it as a value-neutral word, and we can even talk about, say, Muslim scriptures or Christian scriptures as myths, saying thereby that there is a story behind them, and that story is insightful, that story is meaningful. Now, thereby we are not insulting the Christian sentiments or Muslim sentiments. So, believing in myths makes you rather more religious in a way, and then making you irreligious. So, but exactly as you said that myth is a fuzzy construct, mental construct. See, knowledge is also a mental construct. Now,
that is why you call it a conundrum. We'll have to see that how that overlapping can be solved.
So, how the knowledge is constituted. Now, there is a famous Kantian theory that we get the sense manifold from our senses, and we put it in the categories that are provided by our mind, and then only percepts and concepts. Concepts are provided by the mind, and percepts we get through our senses. Okay. And percepts are blind without concepts. And concepts are empty without percepts. So the knowledge is born. Knowledge is born by the marriage of concepts and precepts. So mental constructs are essential everywhere. And you see, actually, and we were talking about the anthropological approach to myths. Anthropologists have proved how myths contain very complex structures of the social and family life of the societies, how they depict them. And these tales are not that much illogical or mysterious. So they have their own logic. So definitely mythology means that you are trying to understand myths with the help of reason. So there is a discourse, there is a dialogue, there is an attempt at comprehension. So you are using reason, the way you use it for interpreting art, interpreting literature. So in the process of interpretation, something, if you are a connoisseur, if you have a taste for literature, when you read a book, for example, I have read Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha. The story is in my mind, and sometimes I discuss it with some of my friends. This is the story of Siddhartha. But I can convey the husk of that story, not the essence, not the beauty of that story to my audience. Similarly, if you are giving the rational account of a myth, definitely some portions will be left out. And some, maybe most essential things will be left out. See, the scriptures, we believe about scriptures that we cannot know their ultimate meaning. But that does not mean that we are not to make an attempt to understand them.
Yes, this is the
and
point.
Then again, see, this is very important. The meaning changes with the evolution, with the epistemic evolution of the individual, of the society. So maybe the way we understand our scriptures this time, maybe after 1,000 years, the people who would read the same scriptures they would understand them in a different way. And in our own time, sometimes we are surprised. Someone gives us an interpretation of a verse, and we are baffled. We never thought like that. And then we realize that, of course, this can be one of the meanings of this verse. So when we approach myths through reason, so there are very important meanings of myths. And as literature, as we say, that literature has many meanings. It is a polysemy. And it is its beauty.
Glorification. There are many dimensions.
It is the beauty of. Now in philosophy, now there is a contradiction in Greeks. Now they say that metaphor enriches literature. It gives life to literature, but it gives death to philosophy. It makes philosophy poor. So because that is why Aristotle says that Plato uses metaphors, he uses poetry in his dialogues, in his Republic and other dialogues. But in East, we don't have this kind of distinction in philosophy and literature. So myth I consider as a part of literature.
Sir, talking about scriptures, I've got two small references, one from Hindu mythology and second from the scripture of Muslims, that's Quran. In Hindu mythology, as they believe that everything starts from a sacrifice. We may not call it necessarily as a slaughter, say a sacrifice. That first there was a corpse. And that corpse is the beginning of that human civilization. That's if you want to infuse a life into anything, that means it has to begin with a sacrifice. That's an Aryan myth. That's on one side. In Quran, if God makes us understand that how is God like, He says that I'm like nothing. I'm like nothing. So there cannot be any allegory, any illustration that can completely fulfill that this is like God. Or if God says that this world is like the house of a spider, that it's as flimsy, as fragile as a spider. My question may sound a little longer, but I'm trying to create a background to put a question that can we very safely, with all hesitation, say that are ideas of God myth-dependent? That He has to take recourse to myths to make us understand even the subjects, the themes that are related to our practical life. So is this the language of God that comes to us through the language of myths?
I would definitely try to respond to your question in the way that, see, one of the theorists, one of the most important theorists in the study of myth is Claude Lévi-Strauss. And his theories, his structural theories, have been a great contribution towards the anthropological approach to the study of myth. Now he interprets myth, he sees myth as a communication, as a mode of communication, like language and music. And he says, in music, there are sounds, but the sounds are not important in themselves. It is their structure. That is the relationship of sounds with other sounds. And that makes the importance. Now he says in myth, it is the narrative that stands for the sounds of the music. And so far as the structure is concerned, structure can be perceived at different levels and in different codes. So there is no one particular version of any particular myth as the right one.
Inconclusive.
All the versions are equally right. All the versions are equally right. Now, he says that myth is like a society. Myth is like a society, and it is made of the parts. And as in the society, every part plays its role in the making of the whole. So, in the myth, every component part makes its important contribution towards the making of the whole of the myth. And his approach is analytical. That is, he suggests that myths should be broken into their constituent elements in order to understand the phenomena that is depicted in the myth. And he has drawn our attention to the very important concept of Malnovisky. he refocused rather the connection between myths and society, myths and social institutions. But he says now his this theory is based on certain assumptions. Now the assumptions are that all human behavior is based on certain unchanging patterns, whose structure is the same in all ages and in all societies. So probably I am responding to your question.
Coming closer.
Second, he says that every society is has a consistent structure, and therefore it has a functional unity in which every component plays a very significant role. And he says that these myths work along the social machine. They run the social machine, and they are ultimately drawn from the structure of the mind. And he says that the structure of the mind, as of the myths that it weaves, is binary. That is, the human mind is always dealing with pairs of contradictions or opposites.
That's why it's binary.
That's why it is binary. This is the claim of Claude Lévi-Strauss. And he says that it is the function of the myths to mediate between these opposites.
It's a link.
Mediate between these opposites between these contradictions. Say, for example, death, life, raw, cooked, nature, culture,
day, night,
good, darkness, good, evil. This is the myth takes the part of deviation. This mediation. And he says that mythical thought, this is the quote, mythical thought always progresses with the awareness of oppositions and aims at the resolution of these oppositions. So, according to Claude Lévi-Strauss, myth is a mode of communication for a society through which it tries to resolve the pairs of opposites or contradictions. So probably I have...
Sir, if we talk about Hindu belief system, we have Ramayana and Mahabharata as the two biggest, grandest epics.
Yeah.
Greeks didn't have epics then. Can we safely say that mythology replaced a religious system? If Hindus believed in an epic called Ramayana and Mahabharata, in Greece, mythology replaced, and this was considered as to be the epic, say Homer's Iliad or Odyssey. So this was taken as the source from which they would draw their religious belief.
Yeah, of course. See, actually, it was woven there. What is the contribution of Homer or Hesiod, or for that matter, authors of Ramayana and Mahabharata? They have articulated it, they have expressed it, they have collected it, they have given it a form. So it was there in the society. So just like grammar. Grammar is in the language. We speak, say, for example, Kashmiri language. This is our mother tongue. We don't have to learn its grammar separately than language. The time we learn the language, we learn the grammar itself. So we have learned the grammar of a language. It is embedded in the language. The myths are embedded in a social structure, and you articulate them, you give them expression, and then you see they become traditional stories. So later on they become the source of explaining things.
So you're trying to draw a link between linguistics and mythology.
Of course, there
as Max Muller said, that it's a confusion of language that sometimes results in the form of myths.
Yes, not exactly confusion of language.
Because what God said, that was not a reference, a sharp, clear reference to a thing or an event. So that he says that it was a kind of words pitted against words. So there's a complete pandemonium created in between the words. So when we could not understand this confusion of words, we named it as myth. How will you describe it?
You see, so far as you are taking me in the domain of metaphysics. So you see, actually, when we pursue any discipline, so at the last long, we enter into the domain of metaphysics. Even if we start discussing theory of relativity or Newton's laws in physics, that is hardcore science, ultimately we will reach metaphysical ground.
Yeah.
So that is the ultimate thing we reach. So when you say that, so it is exactly that, because you see, ultimately when you are trying to comprehend, you see, as I said earlier, that reality is not exhausted by the domain of logic or by the domain of reason. Reality is vaster. Reality is very extensive than the domains of human reason or human logic. So simply, and we see human logic is evolving, human reason is evolving. Now, there was a time when there was only one geometry, Euclidean geometry. Now we have geometries. So earlier we believed in the postulate that parallels don't meet.
Okay.
So we no more believe in that. You see, it is a conception, it is an assumption of the space that makes us to believe.
Earlier we believed that there are 9 planets. Now we have only 8. And maybe we don't know that down the years how many planets will we lose more.
So similarly, when we say that what we're talking about, myths are, they try to depict the reality that is unnamed. So sometimes, but oftentimes, we have to take certain things for granted. Now say for example in physics or astrophysics, the ultimate thing we have to stop with is the Big Bang.
Big Bang.
So we have no way to go beyond that at the present epistemic level.
No.
The present human epistemic level is that we are going up to Big Bang, not beyond that. Now the question arises, where did that gaseous substance, however large it might have been, come from? And why was that Big Bang at that particular moment of time caused? And the notion of time itself. So when you enter in these domains, though, there are some very important questions that disturb your mind. So normally they don't disturb common people, otherwise it would have been very difficult to run the world.
But they are disturbing in their very nature.
They are disturbing in their, but very, very minuscule minority is disturbed by these questions.
And they should be, the rest of the people should be left out, otherwise it will lead us to a great confusion.
You see, I was wondering that Thales is called the father of philosophy, who was a Greek. He was born in 6th century BC. Now the question he raised, because of which he is known as the father of philosophy, is this: what is this universe made of?
Okay.
Now normal human beings don't raise such questions. They can ask you, what is this coat made of?
Cloth.
What is this building made of? Now something, when you something you see strange.
Everything has got its element.
Now when you see something strange about which you have not seen, which you do not know, you might ask someone, what is this made of? But you don't ask such a question, what is this universe made of? Now the answer that he provided was very primitive and very sort of, in a way, we will say childish as compared to the present level of knowledge. But the raising of this question, now we know that this universe is composed of 110 elements. But at that time, the raising of the question was very important. And he came with
it had not earlier occurred.
It had not earlier occurred. And it cannot occur to an ordinary man.
Of course. So
it would occur to us. So similarly, when certain questions, so everybody cannot create myths, as everybody cannot create literature.
So I'm talking about post-Renaissance writers who were deeply influenced by mythology.
Yeah.
And I'll illustrate my question with one example, with one reference, and that's James Joyce's Ulysses. Ulysses was in fact Odysseus playing in a different, Leopold Bloom of Dublin playing a role that earlier in Homer's way of presenting the things Odysseus played. So how can this mythology, Greek mythology particularly, be a background to the writers of the contemporary world? How can we get a modern, contemporary, literary perspective of this subject called mythology?
Sir, one submission I made while talking about Lévi-Strauss, he says that myth depicts the psychic tendencies of the continuing psychic tendencies of the society. and the structures. So myths are derived ultimately from the mind. And all human behavior. So we are not accepting or rejecting. This is a tentative explanation I am trying to giving. So myths are ultimately derived from human mind. And human mind is, all human behavior is based on certain unchanging patterns. And the structure of these patterns is universal. It is the same in all ages and in all times. That is, when we presume about human mind, that now this theory has come from many quarters, from different fields. Take Noam Chomsky, take Kant. Okay. So this is coming again and again in different forms. So even in this postmodernism, you can see the traces of this theory, that if you have this kind of approach, that there are certain patterns, the structure of which is universal, and if all human behavior is determined by those patterns. So now myths, as we said, they are very foundational. They are very foundational, and they are related to foundational questions, not only about the origin of this world, not only about the origin of the human society, not only about the origin of various customs, various traditions, various beliefs, various rituals of a society. So, because myths cover so much, and you see, you cannot prove the consistency of any system beyond any postulates. Whatever system you are working in, you have to postulate something. You have to presuppose something. In mathematics, a system cannot be proved to the 100%, because in every system you have to postulate one or two things. You can make your postulates less and less. For example, 4 postulates. If someone has 4 postulates, someone has 5 postulates, someone has 3 postulates. But you cannot prove a system without postulates. Now, in any system, you have to assume one or two things. So when you assume, that means the system is not explained 100% rationally. So you have to, in mathematics, you have to have recourse to something which is not explained. If you try to explain this assumption, you have to take another assumption. Okay. So this is sort of, you cannot do with this kind of thing. So that is, when we are doing this thing, when we are trying to explain our present contemporary world, or our institutions, our society. Now, say comparatively, if we talk about our society, here in Srinagar, here in Kashmir, probably we are less evolved, probably our epistemic level is not that high as the society in Europe or America or elsewhere, even in our own country, in Delhi or something. But even in those society, when you are trying to explain the existing customs and traditions, you cannot explain them 100% on the basis of reason. You have to have recourse to something which is beyond reason.
So you mean to say that literature also is a kind of manifestation of those social thoughts, that if there's a literary form that's existing at now in our society, that also finds a form in those facts or characters that have gone.
See, actually there has been an attempt that literature should come as close as possible to myth. So because myth is pregnant with meaning. And it is more powerful, it is more forceful. So that is why, see, people are trying to create myths in literature. You referred to James Joyce. Now he reworked a myth.
That was magic.
So either you rework a myth or you create a new myth. So that depends upon your genius. So you try to explain a phenomena, a civilization. What is the scope of your myth? So that also depends upon what a kind of genius you are, a writer you are. Maybe you create a myth that explains something universally, at the universal plane.
So there are myths within myths. About Homer, it's being generally believed. I don't know whether, I'm not even sure about it. I just want to have it cleared from a professor of philosophy like you, that we're not completely sure about even his gender, as to whether we can call that he was Homer or she was Homer. One, that second, that was he at all? Was he? Did he exist at all? So the very existence of, like Aesop, that they would say that anybody who would create fables would be named as Aesop.
Yeah.
So the same way that if somebody would write an epic, he was called as Homer. So the very subject of mythology gets complicated within. I just want to have a note from you about this.
So far as this does not differentiate, as I told you earlier, that in mythology, we are not much bothered about the historical origins of the myth.
In Habba Khatun or Laldad even are being talked about as legends or as personalities. There's a debate going on.
Just we call them legends, Habba Khatun, and because they are rooted in history, and we have a historical. But people have made myths out of them. There is a Pandit, he's an artist, Gokul Dhembi. He told me a story, a strange story about Habba Khatun, a mythical story. And he told me that it was his mother. She used to narrate this story to Habba Khatun.
So his mother's grandmother might have been familiar to Habba Khatun.
Yes. And in that story, Habba Khatun appears to be a Kashmiri Pandit girl. And then how she has evolved, and then what has happened. There's all sort of, maybe they had to explain certain certain customs or certain problems of this section of the society. That is why they evolved this kind of myth.
So there's a huge scope that you can accept or you can reject. You can refute a mythology by providing a counter-mythological background.
Definitely.
So thank you very much for being with us.
I'm also thankful you gave me an occasion to introspect and do this loud thinking.
Thank you very much, sir. So Professor Amir Zafar, talking about a subject as vast as mythology, where there are no conclusions, there are no facts, there are only interpretations. Everything is loose-ended, open-ended. Everything ends at a question. There are no concrete, solid answers.